this matter.
Mr. Chairman, that is greatly appreciated. It truly is.
It may not affect the outcome of this veto override.
I understand.
Mr. Chairman, you're live on YouTube.
Thank you. Okay, we're coming back in from executive session, and I appreciate the public's patience with that, and we'll go ahead and continue the meeting. Mr. Richards?
Members of the committee, this was a longer explanation than almost any of the others will take, just for your discussion purposes. If you choose to vote to override, I think would be the appropriate motion, and this is not a governor's rec, so it would require a second. If you vote to override, this section 307 will be in the supplemental budget bill, but it will not be numbered as 307. Keep that in mind. 307 went away. I can't bring back that number, but it'll appear something like 347, a subsequent section 300. If the committee does not want to take action, no motion is needed, and we'll move on to the next one.
Mr. Richards, could you just briefly explain the reason that the number would change to a different section?
Sure. Once a entire section is vetoed, it's our practice, and as well as within the statutes, that we don't reuse those numbers to avoid any confusion in the future. Your action here today can also not undo the one employee who has benefited from this action. It is not retroactive, but it would be from the effective date of this bill around March 15th forward. Those funds could not be transferred under a legislative rule if this is not vetoed again, and if it is vetoed again, only if you have sufficient votes to override the veto.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Historically, this particular section, which limits those transfers, has it ever been vetoed before and that veto stood in the past?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's been vetoed multiple times by multiple different governors. I don't recall whether it has ever not withstood, meaning the legislature has routinely attempted to override, and I believe they've always been successful.
Okay. Any questions from the committee on this particular veto override? Any motions?
I would move to override the veto.
We have,
Second.
I'm sorry, who? All right, we have a motion. We had a second over here. I'll give it to the Senate, Mr. Smith. Okay, so we have a motion from Vice Chair Pendergraph to override and a second from Senator Smith. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
Okay, that motion carries.
Members of the committee, the next item appears, and now we'll proceed in order, appears on page 6.
One moment, Mr. Richards. Just for clarification, you said that this applied to many different sections. So with that vote, we've covered all those sections that this would have applied to.
Mr. Chairman, I understood that to be conforming throughout. And just to be clear, most of the conformings are to provide additional flexibility. So, for example, there's a conforming footnote in the Public Defender's Office to relieve them from the restrictions in 307. So the conforming language is actually kind of a reversal. It gives a few appropriations additional flexibility. So if you want to pull any one of those out and say, hey, we don't want to give this flexibility, a subsequent vote would be necessary.
Thank you.
And in fact, that is the first example on page 6. Footnote 8B, you will see that the governor has vetoed the appropriation in subsection A shall not be subject to section 307. So section 307 has essentially been reinserted as section 347, and we would reinsert this language, which would ultimately give footnote A, which applies to the WIP program, the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, additional flexibility where they could move funds between the 900 series, the 200 series, and the 100 series, for example.
Okay. And for our edification, and the public's, the WIP program is the community college program, which integrates with the public, industry. This is in an effort to really get CTE moving along and have our community colleges and high schools, frankly, be more responsive to the demands of our industry. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So this override, will it just cover those lines up there under B, or what about the other language that's stricken further down page 6?
Well, with your direction, I understood that all of the conforming amendments applied on section 307. So
Yes.
in my interpretation, and correct me if I'm wrong, subsection B would be reinserted.
Yes.
And unless anyone wishes to remove that.
Are there any concerns from the committee? Okay.
Footnote number 10 is the next item, and the first two vetoes are language issues, is appropriated for a feasibility study. He removes the words "a feasibility study to assess expansion of," and he removes the words "results of the study." This has limited practical implication. The second, or the last sentence in that footnote may have some implication. It says, "The appropriation shall not be transferred or expended for any other purpose." You will see this vetoed throughout the bill. And what this basically means is this $20,000, if the governor could not spend it for the purposes appropriated, he could take those funds and spend it for something else. Many of you who have been through my training, this is the example where you appropriate money for grasshopper mitigation and the governor uses it for, say, mosquito mitigation or something like that.
And Mr. Richards, do we know what the amount of that 20,000, if any of it has been spent, if it's all available? We're halfway through the budget. Do we know where we're at on that?
I do not.
Mr. Hibbert, do you have any idea?
Mr. Chairman, off the top of my head, I do not. We can help LSO arrive at that statistic.
Okay, so we're flying a little bit blind here, whether we're affecting something or not, but is that the end for this section? Okay. Any questions, concerns, or comments, or motions? Okay, we'll move on.
The next item is on item number 11. This is $750,000 for reimbursing Wyoming agencies for assistance on the border. And you will see that the governor struck some of the limits on these funds related to the volunteer agreements. It appears that much of the substance still remains.
Okay. Any questions on this line item? Any motions? All right, we'll move on.
Mr. Chairman, the next item is on page 11, footnote 1 for the Office of the Public Defender. This was the exact example that I gave, and I believe pursuant to your prior motion, this has been addressed.
Okay.
The next veto appears on page 12. This is within the Department of Agriculture. And this is $300,000 for ag in the classroom. He removes the notion that ag in the classroom will be part of the standard budget in the 27-28 biennium. In other words, I believe his message indicates that he views this program as a legislative initiative, not an executive initiative. So this sentence being struck would not include it in the standard budget, but that would not prohibit you from adding this program if there is such a desire in the markup of the 27-28 budget. It's just a matter of, do you want it before you in the standard budget, or do you want it to appear based upon a legislative interest in that program?
Any questions? Any motions? So just again, for the public's edification and mine, the lack of having this in the standard budget would require that we add it to the budget next year. And what kind of indication or reminder would be brought before this body? Mr. Hibbert.
Mr. Chairman, routinely, not 100% of the time, but routinely, the agency will put in an exception request, we won't put it in the standard, but then that'll be in their budget request for you to administer to.
Okay, all right. Any questions? Ms. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Chairman. So if you look at the letter that was sent to the Secretary of State, this includes programs beyond just ag in the classroom. So We the People, which is the civics initiative, and the Centennial Farm and Ranch programs. So I personally think that these all have value in being in the standard budget. But I'd love to open that up to the conversation of the committee. Holistically, again, this is the Wyoming Ag in the Classroom, the We the People Civics Program, and the Centennial Farm and Ranch Program is how we honor our multiple generation landowners and their commitment to our state. So I would ask for the committee's consideration in looking at those programs holistically to be in the standard budget.
Okay. Any motions? All right, we'll move on. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next item appears on page 12, footnote 4B, and this is a legislative appropriation of $1 million from the Game and Fish Fund. And I believe the governor's position on this, not to overly paraphrase, he supports the prevention of endangered species, but he is of the opinion that the legislature appropriating from the Game and Fish Fund is an overreach of the legislative powers.
Go ahead, Senator.
I'd like to see this be reinstated. I don't believe it's an overreach. It requires, the way I read it, it requires approval of the commission, which actually gives them a second veto over it. If they don't like it, they don't have to do it. But it's basically a solid recommendation from us. Is that correct, Mr. Richards?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, I was paraphrasing what the governor said. That's not necessarily my opinion. I'm restating what the governor's position is. The language was written to the best of our abilities to acknowledge the oversight of the Game and Fish Commission to have kind of that two-tier approval, the legislative direction, and then shall only be effected upon a majority vote of the Game and Fish Commission.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. That's exactly the way I read it. And to me, it gives them, the executive branch, the ultimate veto. If they don't want to, commission doesn't want to approve it, they don't have to, but it is a directive from us that we'd like to see that if possible. And if they don't agree, it's fine, but I'd like to see us send this one back to it. I'd make the motion.
I'll second that.
Motion by Senator Driscoll, seconded by Senator Smith. All those in favor of reinstating this language, signal aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Okay, that carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next veto appears at the top of page 13, and with your prior affirmative vote to reinstate paragraph B, I'm understanding that this is a conforming.
Please proceed.
The next veto appears on page 14, agency 15, the Attorney General's office, and this is for $400,000 for the child advocacy centers, and the vetoed language simply allows for distribution of these funds other than on a prorated basis based upon the number of completed interviews. So that the money still gets distributed. The legislature provided a distribution methodology, and the governor indicated that he believed other relevant factors other than completion of an interview should be included.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Any motions? All right, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on page 16, the State Parks and Cultural Resources is the next area, and there are three that I believe are quite similar, and they also relate to the Department of Agriculture's Ag in the Classroom, a very similar issue, whether or not to include these in the standard budget. Footnote number 2 is We the People. Footnote number 3 is for humanities initiatives, and footnote number 4 is the Centennial Farm and Ranch Program. two of which Representative Sherwood previously explained. I would note here, because this is a bit of an unusual circumstance, Agency 24 does not have any supplemental budget request. So if you don't do anything else, that entire agency will be brought back in the budget bill, available for amendment on the floor, just to adjust these footnotes.
Any comments from the committee?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead, Senator Smith.
On this paragraph on We the People, would you explain what's being cut out and why? I apologize, I'm just not understanding.
Mr. Richards?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Smith, the language here has nothing to do with this current biennium. The question is whether or not, when you meet next winter, whether this program should be in the standard budget presented to you, or whether or not it should be an exception request, or I think the governor would prefer a legislative initiative, meaning an amendment from one of you during markup.
So in order for We the People to be funded, we'd have to bring an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
So
To the chair, please.
our vote, Mr. Chair, our vote today will it affect the We the People funding today?
So, Senator, yes, it will. If we were to override this veto, then next fall, when we're working on the biennium budget, it would be included in the standard budget, which is the base budget for that department. So that's why I asked the question earlier, is there some indication, something to prod us to ensure that a program that we liked before, we remember to put it in? But it would be incumbent upon this body to add it to the budget again. So it may basically make it every budget, this body would have to bring it in. The language here would mean that it would just become part of the budget for that agency.
So to be clear, Mr. Chair, so then for the listeners and for this body here, if we don't override the veto, then We the People and these ag programs, we have to bring those back.
Yes.
This body, this approach body. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Any motions?
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that these programs stay within the standard budget under Section 24.
Okay, a motion brought by Representative Sherwood, seconded by Senator Smith. All those in favor of reinstating this language indicate aye.
Chairman, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Go
does
ahead.
that include all three?
All three. That was the motion. Okay? Indicate with an aye your support. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next veto appears on page 17. I believe this is.
Mr. Richards, I just want to state that, before you go on, that just to be clear now, that will be in the standard budget, the We the People and these other programs as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, the next veto appears on page 17 in footnote 5. Pursuant to your prior action, I understand this will be a conforming adjustment and no further action is necessary. The next veto appears on page 21 in the Department of Transportation. Again, I understand this to be a conforming language.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the next item appears on footnote number 16 on page 24 relating to the Department of Health. And this has multiple parts. This relates to the demolition in Evanston of several facilities at the former Wyoming State Hospital. The first portion of the veto is opposition to the language as a condition of the general fund appropriation, and you will see that multiple times throughout this bill. The balance of this veto on page 24 and 25 should describe how the funds can be used and whether or not certain buildings or facilities or, in fact, underground tunnels may or may not be eliminated. I think just some background, I think the community and a potential business was looking at these, this area and some of these buildings, and some of the facilities had a potential useful life and others were not. And there have been a variety of different opinions, as you can see from the governor's office and the legislator advocating for this, what should or shouldn't be demolished.
Mr. Hibbard, could you tell us where we're at on spending on this particular line item?
Mr. Chairman, I will do so. I do not have that at my fingertips, but that's on its way.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Any motions? I hesitate to make a motion not knowing where we're at on this demolition.
But, Mr. Chairman, that was my question too, if we could come back to this when we have more information.
Do I have a motion to table this section?
I would make a motion to table this.
All right. Do I need a second for that? Okay, this has been tabled and we'll come back to it later. And Mr. Hibbert, if you could just let us know as soon as you have that information, we'll revisit this one. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next veto appears on page 27 in the Department of Family Services. This will appear 2 times, once in the Department of Family Services and similar veto in the Wyoming Community College Commission. This footnote, number 5, mandated cooperation between the 2 agencies in the development of the eKids, or Early Childhood Integrated Data System. Both entities appeared before the Joint Appropriations Committee in October, and I would describe them as collaborating and cooperating in their work on this area, but the mandate to do so has been removed.
Any comments, questions from the committee? Any motions? All right, we'll move on.
Mr.
Richards?
Chairman, also on page 27 in footnote 8, you'll see this type of a sentence vetoed several times. This is $2.4 million for an increase of room and board reimbursement at group homes, residential treatment centers. And the legislator who inserted this as a footnote restricted the funds to be spent on anything but those group home rates.
And we don't have any reversion language here either, so what would this lead to if it had been restricted to only this expenditure without a reversion language?
Mr. Chairman, the reversion is still required of all appropriations unexpended on June 30th, 2026, so those would not be impacted. By reinserting these language, any remaining funds out of the $2.4 million could not be moved to other programs, for example, support for food care programs, low-income energy assistance, senior care programs. They would have to be, the $2.4 million could only be used for group homes, residential treatment centers, and BOCES.
Any questions? Question?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Richards,
Senator Smith?
I don't have the page you're referring to, the numbers you're referring to. Could somebody
27.
help me?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can explain why there is a little bit of a difference. What you are looking at is the line items as it was presented to the governor, and what Don is looking at is after those have been incorporated with that bracketed language. So I think because we're at a point now where we've had sufficient additional languages inserted, we're probably about a page to 2 pages off
So,
from the actual bill
Ms.
itself.
Vaughn, if I understand you correctly, if you follow along in the budget, you'd be right with us, but if you follow on in this document, you might get off.
That is correct.
So you should, Senator Smith, also have the actual budget, and that's where we're working from, is that what we're running
Correct.
into, Ms. Vaughn?
If you're working from the budget, you will follow straight exactly what Don is describing. But if
So
you're
can-
working from that veto that was handed out this morning, at this point, you'll probably be a page or 2 off.
Did everyone get a copy of the budget?
Yes, sir, they did.
I have a copy of that at my desk. If I could have you guys email me that, then I'll track with the copy. Thank you. Oh, perfect, thank you.
Okay, so we're on page 27, and I don't think we've dispatched this language yet, have we, Mr. Richards? Okay. All right, any questions about this? All right, any motions? Senator
Mr.
Lewis?
Chairman, I would like to reinsert that.
Okay, we have a motion to reinsert. Do we have a second? Seconded by Vice Chair Pendergraph. All those in favor, indicate aye.
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 All those opposed? No. Okay, that carries. Go ahead, Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, the next item appears on page 29 of the bill and on page 28 of the governor's letter. This relates to Agency 55, the Oil and Gas Commission. As you can see, he has struck that as the condition of the appropriation. Again, the substance of the sentence still remains. He made it clear in his letter that the as the condition preposition, he has concerns with that language.
And Mr. Richards, this type of language where the legislature dictates certain either spending policy or action of the executive based on the funding, is this common? Is this rare? Would, in your opinion, how often does this happen?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe that the legislature does impose some reasonable conditions on a number of appropriations. That being said, your prior committee noticed that this phrase has been struck, I'm going to say a dozen or so times. The message has been received. Your prior committee or members of it directed LSO staff to review this, and we will, and you'll see this in the supplemental, we will use different language. It will have the same or similar intent, but certainly don't want to offend if this particular introduction is problematic.
Okay. Any questions? Comments?
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Larson?
so is the intent, I guess, we're not bringing this part back, I guess, so there's no need to put,
I haven't called for a motion yet, so.
Okay.
Anything could happen. All right, any motions? All right, go on.
The next item appears on page 29 of the bill, Agency 57. This would be 28 of the letter. This is similar to the discussion we just had in the Department of Family Services on the eKids program. I'll bring to your attention, you did not override or vote to override that language, so it would be somewhat inconsistent if you overrid this language. They would be offset.
For the sake of consistency, I will not call for a motion. We'll move on.
Mr. Chairman, Agency 67 appears on page 33 and 36 of the budget, and for those of you on the letter, appears on page 31 and 34 of the governor's message. These really are two distinct issues, but I think it would be best to address them in reverse order. So speaking to footnote number 12 on page 36, or on the veto message, footnote number 12 on page 34. This is the language related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you will see that the governor has struck or on any diversity, equity, and inclusion program, activity, or function. The governor left the language that says the appropriation, no funds shall be expended to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but it did not, he struck the language about broader programs.
Okay, any comments, questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that's.
Senator Smith.
I think that's great language. Why do we take it out? We want to remove that philosophy, which is, it's anti-American at its very core from anything that's being taught in our state. So anyway, so that's my comment, and I'll wait for you to entertain motions.
Any other comments or questions? All right, motions. Moved by Vice Chair Pendergraft to override the veto. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Smith. All those in favor, represent aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. That carries.
Mr. Chairman, returning to page 33 of the budget language, 31 of the veto message, you'll see it's a little bit hard to find, but after the words endowment and matching, The governor also struck the words, or the footnote number 12, very small print there. The reason I think these are slightly different issues, you could vote to remove both of them, but the first one really applied to state aid, that is the general operations of the University of Wyoming, whereas endowments and matching funds might be a private gift supporting a certain cause, so a slightly different issue here.
Okay, just to be clear, so this stricken Roman, or number 12 here, footnote, would mean that private funds would also not be allowed to be used for the use of, or the sharing of DEI in the classroom or in the programs. Is that an accurate way of portraying that?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think it's a slightly, and I'm not an attorney, but I would interpret it slightly differently in that the matching funds of $39,500,000 and those programs would not be subject to any of the DEI programs, DEI philosophies. This is a fraction of the private funds that are available to the University of Wyoming. Those are literally operated by a private entity. So it's just the matching programs where the state is going to be a participant would be prohibited from any DEI programs. But if there is a separate issue with the foundation, I don't believe that's contemplated here.
So overriding this veto would be the same action basically as the previous override. Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there was to be some sort of a DEI function, it would have to be entirely privately funded.
If we override the veto.
Yeah.
That's correct. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Any motions? Okay.
Second.
Vice Chairman Pendergraph brought the motion, and it was seconded by, who do I have over here? Senator Larson. All right, all those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All those opposed? No? No. I think that carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next item for your consideration is on page 41 of the bill, Agency 91, the Wyoming stable coin. It appears on page 39 of the governor's letter. The first portion is just that introductory language as a condition of. There is another limitation here where the contract shall only be with a Wyoming domiciled entity when conducting funding in this appropriation. I don't know that any funds have been spent for the actual contract, but I know that they appeared before you in December, are certainly in the RFP process for this.
Okay. Any questions?
One second. I'd like to move to override on that one.
All right.
That's, they went directly against, he struck it out, and they did exactly the opposite.
Okay, we have a motion to strike, a second? Seconded by Senator Larson.
Just for clarification, I believe, I'm understanding Senator Driscoll's motion just on the word only, not the introductory phrase.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't address you.
I would note that the word endeavor is in there. Are you okay with that?
It's existing language, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rich, I believe it's existing language. I don't think I can do much to change it.
That's true. Okay. Although this is going into a new budget, so the language could be added, couldn't it? Even though you're doing an override.
Mr. Chairman, you're exactly correct. You could strike endeavor, for example. You could strike endeavor and insert another verb. So the entirety of this is eligible, not only for you today, but your colleagues on the floor when you mark up the budget. Once you bring in this section, it's all up for grabs. However, keep in mind, it's possible it could be a moot issue because by March 15th, the contracts could be signed. I don't know that, but it's possible.
On that note, and this would go back to the state hospital demolition as well, could we add the language notwithstanding funds that have already been expended, or is there potential to add language like that so that we don't get into a situation where we're trying to change something midstream that's already got money expended?
Mr. Chairman, and you'll have a chance to review this as well. On that note, I would ask that we would be allowed to confer with our attorneys. I think that even absent that language, that is the intent, meaning that none of our laws are going to be retroactive.
I assume that would also, Mr. Richards, apply to a project that is underway. Would that be accurate? Okay. And maybe not completely spent yet, but underway.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend my motion to
Okay.
strike the endeavor as well.
All right, we want to strike the word endeavor. That's part of the motion. Do I still have a second from Senator Larson? Okay, so go ahead, Mr. Richards.
And just to wordsmith, I think he wants to strike endeavor two.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Richards, yes, thank you.
Okay, is everybody clear on the motion? All right, go ahead, Senator Guru.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So by passing this motion, if they're in the middle of a process right now, writing up an RFP, taking contracts right now, that would fundamentally change the scope of what they could be doing, or what would they would be allowed to do, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is my understanding, and it's possible that they have some contracts in place, maybe an advisor, maybe some financial systems, maybe some IT systems currently in place. Others are not in place. Should this pass, this would become effective in mid-March, we'll say, and shall contract with Wyoming domiciled entities.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, could I ask for a timeout for a minute to confer?
Certainly.
Thank you. Just a minute.
Okay, I just had a sidebar conversation with Mr. Richards, and I think it would be prudent for us to have, before our final vote on the supplemental budget, an opportunity for the agency to come back in here and tell us where they're at on the contracts. But I think it's still okay to move forward with the motion. We'll have time to reverse that if we feel like we're too far down the path. All right? Okay. So the motion's been brought and seconded to override this veto. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that carries, and that does include striking the language that says endeavor to as well. Thank you. Mr. Richards, continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next item appears on Agency 96, the State Budget Department. Footnote number 1 on the bottom of page 42 of the bill and page 40 of the governor's message. This is conforming, so I assume this has already been addressed.
Okay, move on.
The next item for your consideration appears on page 52 of the bill, page 50 of the message. Footnote number 1 in the Department of Education has the introductory phrase. The same issue appears on page 54 for the Office of Administrative Hearings, and on the budget message, page 52. Again, it's just the introductory phrase as a condition of. Next item for your consideration appears on page 58 of the bill, Agency 38, the Wyoming Gaming Commission, and this appears on page 56 of the governor's message. And I think you've addressed this with conforming language. The next issue for your consideration appears on page 66 of the budget bill. This is section 300N, and this appears on page 64 of the message. This is one of those words very similar to what you just visited about. This is $5.8 million, again, for the Wyoming stable token, and is very similar to in fact, it's identical to the language that you reviewed. So for purposes of consistency, the committee may want to consider striking endeavor to and overriding the veto on only.
So moved. Second? Seconded by my co-chair. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. That carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next two vetoes appear on page 67 in section 303, page 65 of the governor's message. There's an introductory phrase as a condition of, and then the second veto is conforming language, which you have already addressed. Okay. Page 69, we're now in the section 303 Chancery Courts, subsection G, page 67 of the governor's message. This allows, his veto allows the Supreme Court to use those carryover amounts in the amount of $947,000 more broadly than just the Chancery Court. Had the language not been vetoed, those carryovers are only or are reappropriated for the Chancery Court.
Okay, any questions? All right, we have a motion to override. Do I have a second? I'm sorry, who is that over here? Okay, seconded by Senator Grew. All those, any discussion before we go? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next item for your consideration appears on page 69 of the bill, 67 of the governor's message. This is subsection 8 of section 303. This is $25 million carryover at the University of Wyoming matching funds for research. This relates to the Peary Lab, I believe. This is the flow through porous media. And the language struck is that the reappropriation shall not be transferred or expended for any other purpose and shall revert on June 30th, 2025. So there are really two policy choices here. One is whether those funds could be expended for other purposes other than the research on porous flow through porous media, excuse me. And the second policy choice is the reversion date that is earlier than typical. So almost all of the reversions in this bill would be June 30th, 2026. And there's a little bit of impetus or urgency to spend these funds if this is reinstated, that they must spend them or revert them on June 30th of this year, 2025. So they'd have 12 months less to expend them.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Sorry to be the one to continue to talk.
No, that's all right, Senator.
I'm going to make a motion to go ahead and override this as well. And the reason being is we've been very generous putting money pretty unallocated into the governor's office. And these are some of the funds that we direct very specifically with specific ways we'd like them spent. That's why we spend them. And to turn them into unattached, unobligated funds that can have anything done with them, I fundamentally disagree with. I think we have the ability to appropriate, and this continues, we're going to end up just appropriating funds on a one-time basis, one at a time. And so I think it's important that we send a message that when we put funds to a specific purpose and a specific reason with a reversion, that's what we mean that they're there for. So that's my explanation. Thank you.
There's a motion, and it has been seconded by Representative Alaman. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think with the question we had about the Department of Health and status still applies here, where I don't disagree with the conversation. I think having an update on where these funds are would be helpful to the conversation.
Okay, and I do believe that this had to do with some equipment that had been purchased, and this was remodeling to make room for that purpose. Is that good recollection there, Mr. Richards or Mr. Hibbard?
Mr. Chairman, that's my recollection. I thought there was a representative who was knowledgeable on this in the room. That is my recollection, but I'm not an expert in this area.
Okay, we're still hoping to get word on the Department of Health issue before we close out today, so we may be able to untable that. But the previous situation, we said that we would try to get information from the department. I think we could do the same thing here. We could reach out before our final vote and determine where this remodel might be. But I think we can move forward with the motion. It has been seconded.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grew.
Thank you. So by voting for this motion, we are saying that the money stays with Dr. Peary and the high bay, and the reversion would go on until June 30th, 2026, correct?
No, 2025.
June 30th, 2025.
So Senator, what I would say is that if we just get a message from the department, we might be or the high bay, whichever, we could find out where they're at. We may want to extend that reversion date. So we as a body, I think it's worthwhile to reach out, find out where they're at.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'm in
sir.
full agreement, although if it's already done, it's a moot point. We did it, we
Right.
sent the message.
Right.
It also, by doing this motion, we put it in the supplemental budget so that we can fix it on the floor through an amendment or through the next pass. So
Correct.
for my end, I'm more than happy to have the reports come in, but we can't unring bells, so things that are done are going to happen anyway. But part of it to me, and it's why I stated, I'm looking at Mr. Hibbard down there, is a message to the governor's office that we mean it when we say we have a specific purpose for what we're allocating money out of general fund for, that we mean that's what we want it spent for.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of Senator Driscoll's motion to override the veto, indicate an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Motion carries. And if you could just make a note, we do want to hear, where that project is at before the final vote on the budget, the supplemental budget. All right, Mr. Richards, continue, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the next veto you have already addressed appears on page 73, section 307. The next item appears on page 76 of the budget bill and 74 of the governor's message. This is a somewhat similar issue related to section 307, but it was not needed to be addressed because it doesn't have those conforming issues. Section 310 provides a limitation on the salary increases. Again, there is language in the executive order that was adopted this summer, which limits the use of these funds, but it is not mandated like the legislative language would do. What this limits agencies to is in their next standard budget, they must come in with a personnel services, meaning a 100 series appropriation level or a budget level that cannot exceed the prior biennium plus any salary increases that you have given. What this avoids is, for example, you have a vacancy and you use perhaps that position is vacant for 6 months and you've generated hypothetically $30,000 of savings. That $30,000 technically could be used to give someone a position, a salary increase toward the end of the biennium, and thus roll that salary increase into the standard budget. And while they had funds for it in the current biennium due to the vacancy savings, in the subsequent biennium, that position may not be vacant, and therefore they would need to request some additional funds. This has not happened regularly. I'm not describing this as a regular occurrence, but there have been times historically, back a decade ago, where this practice was a little bit more prominent. That's the purpose of this limitation.
All right, any questions? Mr. Hibbard.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The executive order that was cut was for 307 and 310. They go hand in hand. So my testimony on this is just be what I said previously on section 307. And I will again say that the vacancy savings, we really watch closely. Those individuals that have done this in the past have the requirement of coming to this committee, the State Budget Department and Governor, when this happens, with an exception request. And if you've watched those conversations, you'll know that the agencies are not, they have been communicated to very well, that this is not an accepted practice. So just basically the 307, 310, we handle it again with the executive order, and our track record right now is clean.
Okay. Mr. Hibbard, thank you for that comment. Any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just kind of a personal comment, I guess. It appears to me from watching the legislature for some years that with all of the trust funds and many other things that we've done with allowing agencies or encouraging agencies to establish rules and procedures, that we are abdicating our own authority. And there's a time and a place for that, but we get to the point where we kind of put everything on autopilot and we allow everybody to do the job that we should be doing. So my philosophy, and I think the philosophy of a lot of us, is we want to pull back some of that responsibility that is given to us constitutionally and exercise that, and therefore we're more faithful to the idea of separate
Powers.
Yeah, separation of powers, thank you. So when I see something like this, I'm going to gladly move to override this veto to cause us to do our job.
Is that a motion?
It is.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Okay, seconded by Representative Smith. Any comments or questions on any discussion on this motion?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
So
Griff.
we're, what the motion is to strike the veto on section 310 in its entirety. So that'd be A, B on page 76 of the budget and E on page 77. Is that what we're? Just want to make sure.
C.
I'm sorry, C.
Maybe it's C, yeah.
I went to strike through, it looks like E, I'm sorry, C. I apologize. Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, so for clarity, that this is section A, B, and C, covering pages 72 and the top of 77, or 76 and the top of 77. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of Representative Pendergraft's motion indicate with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? Okay, that motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, by intent, I didn't say this earlier because I didn't want to influence the outcome overtly. But these, Section 310, and Don did a really good job explaining that, but it's for general funds only. But through the executive order and through the state budget department, we make sure that this is applied to all funding sources. And let me explain to you why. If you had a situation where you had the availability of a special revenue source that another agency did not, and then you went out and you had an accountant or somebody else, fiscal, and you gave that salary increase, then all of a sudden you've created a situation where there's an unbalance across the enterprise to where those that have special revenue could have higher paid individuals than those that do not. So I just wanted to make sure that we do this practice across the board on all revenue sources.
And that comment is appreciated, Mr. Rayburn. Thank you. Mr. Richards, continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next two are closely related. They appear on page 78 of the budget, 76 of the governor's message, section 313, school capital construction. And I think these might be addressed, two of them, one on page 78, where he strikes the priority identified by the governor means the project is recommended by the governor's office. In his message, he took exception to that in that some of the funds may have been, but not the totality of the funds, so he did not want to be associated with the full cost of the project. And specifically on page 80 of the budget bill, the word governor is struck, and it seems to be these are very closely related. If you wish to remove one of them, you arguably should remove both or leave both of them struck.
Any discussion? Any motions? Okay, we'll continue on.
The next item vetoed also appears in the same section 313 on page 80 of the budget bill, page 78 of the governor's message. He strikes the word "as approved by the commission." In his veto letter, the governor notes that the commission does not meet in all months, I believe, and that sometimes the director is required to make these decisions in absence of the commission availability.
Okay. Any discussion? Any motions? All right, Mr. Richards, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next vetoed item appears on page 87 of the budget bill. This is actually section 318, which amends section 321 of the 2022 Wyoming session laws. And this is largely just a strike of the "as the condition" language.
All right, any questions? All right, any motions? Mr. Richards, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next veto for your consideration appears on page 91 of the budget bill, page 89 of the governor's message, section 323E. This one does have a material difference in the interpretation. The legislature defined a large project as one for which the state's participation is $50 million. He eliminates language such that the total cost of a large project would be $50 million. That would be the private's participation, private entity's participation, along with the state's appropriation participation. So that $50 million threshold could be $100 million under this vetoed language, or $25 million. The point being is it allows for the total project to be $50 million.
All right, any questions? Any motions? Mr. Richards, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, just below that on page 91 of the bill, 89 of the governor's message, you have that same language of as a condition of.
Continue.
Page 92, section 324, he has vetoed the word shall in 3 instances. This is really a moot issue as the parcel has already been sold.
You want to override that veto? I think we'll go ahead and move on.
Mr. Chairman, on page 95 of the budget bill, 92 and 93 of the governor's message, section 329, employee compensation, you will see a number of the provisions in this have been struck throughout section 329. It's my understanding that the B11 has been processed and that these funds have already been expended. So there is a limited ability to unwind this.
Okay. Any questions? Any motions? Ms. Richards, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, the next item for your consideration appears on page 96 and 97, primarily 97 of the budget bill and 94 of the governor's message. The governor strikes section 330 in its entirety, and this is really a policy issue. This provision would have required in the 27-28 biennial budget, or excuse me, would require in this biennium that the governor identify 24 full-time positions and identify a savings of not less than $2.1 million. That has not been obviously executed. If you choose to restore this, this would become its own new section, and staff would conform the dates to be October 2025 and November 2025.
Okay. Just to help me out with this, this is really telling the governor to go and do something. Is this regularly done by this committee? And by the body?
Mr. Chairman, I believe this has been done 2 or 3 instances. We used a prior instance under the Governor Meade administration, I believe, as a template for this language. So it certainly has been done. I would not call it common practice, not a regular occurrence.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm curious why it was put in.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Smith, Don, would you like to attempt to answer that?
Yes, and I might defer to Elizabeth. This was a Senate amendment as it originally started, and I believe they initially identified specific positions and specific agencies where cuts should be made, and that caused some challenge, and the House did not have this provision, so it was negotiated that the governor have the flexibility to identify positions of his choosing, but the Senate was still, and I don't mean to speak for them, was still very concerned about the total position count and the reduction required there. One last point that I might comment is the 24 position and the $2.1 million was actually a biennial number. So if you did want to continue with this, you may wish to consider retaining the 24 positions, but reducing that amount of money in half. Otherwise, it would arguably be 48 positions. So
Ms.
keep
Martineau?
those.
Sorry, Ms. Martineau, would you like to add something?
Chairman and Senator Smith, I would also add these are unfilled positions. The Senate was very sensitive to the idea of not rifting any positions or making sure there was any hardship there. So the Senate was very thoughtful in that amendment to make sure the governor had his discretion over unfilled positions, 24 of them for the biennium to, at his discretion, eliminate.
Thank you. Follow up?
Mr. Chair, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Any motions? I guess we'll move on, Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, the very next section, section 331, appears on page 97 of the budget bill. This relates to K-12 mental health service grants. By striking the word district throughout this provision, it would allow public schools, including charter schools, to have the ability to participate in these mental health grants.
Any questions? Any motions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
a little more explanation, Don. I guess I missed the page and I'm trying to,
Yeah.
what does it do exactly?
Mr. Chairman, it's 94 of the governor's message and 97 of the budget bill. The language is shown applied to K-12 school districts' mental health service grants. And by striking the word district, some public schools are charter schools, and then the charter schools, not necessarily a district, would qualify to receive student mental health grants along with the public school districts.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would move to override.
Okay, the motion's been brought to override this veto, seconded by my vice chair, or my co-chair, sorry. And all those in favor of the
Mr. Chair,
motion?
before we vote on that, I'd like to talk about the.
Sure, we can have a
motion,
discussion.
right?
Yep.
If I understand this right, this allows charter schools to get access to mental health services. But if we override this, then they have to go through the district, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, then I'll be against this motion. When we vote.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-chair.
Yeah. Yeah, Co-Chair, I'll be voting no, too. I misunderstood the motion, so thank you.
Okay. Any other?
Mr. Chairman, I think more explanation on this. Once again, what does it do exactly? Because I think without it, charter schools have no access whatsoever, I believe, correct?
Mr. Chairman, it's kind of the reverse. So as the legislature adopted it, it specified school district, and by striking the word district, it actually expands the access to charter schools.
I will withdraw my motion, thank you.
Okay, that motion's been
Thank you for the
withdrawn.
explanation.
Withdrawn. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Mr. Richards, would you please continue?
Mr. Chairman, page 98 of the budget bill and 95 of the governor's message. This relates also to section 332 and allows for a charter school in western Wyoming. The governor has struck the words "in addition to," and this language permits the Charter Authorizing Board, which is that statewide board for charter schools, to approve a charter school in western Wyoming. The veto provides that this school be considered the fourth under current law, rather than in addition to the fourth.
So just for clarity, Mr. Richards, this would mean that this would allow for a fifth charter school.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the language that was adopted by the legislature would allow for a fifth. With the governor's veto, he is saying that this would be the fourth under current law.
I don't think we have legal staff here, but we have laws about the four, the limitation on the four. Does this language meet the legal standard to be able to override that other statute?
Mr. Chairman, I can check, but this is in addition to the other statute, the four authorized in 2023, and they cite the 2023 Chapter 179.
So the language allows for a fifth
Correct.
school, okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
This was mine. We researched it
Sure.
pretty carefully, and it will allow, if we override it, will allow one more charter school, depending on what goes. And I will move for override.
all right, we have a motion,
second that.
seconded by my Vice Chair Pendergraph. Any further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Driscoll's motion to override the veto indicate with an aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Okay, motion carries. Mr. Richards, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, we're in the home stretch, just a few more left. Section 340 on page 100 of the budget bill. And 97 of the governor's message. This is for a recreation center in the community of Riverton. The language was struck out in its entirety, including the $2.5 million appropriation and the dollar-for-dollar match.
Okay. Mr. Co-Chair.
I move that we strike.
Okay,
Second.
motion to strike and second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of Co-Chair Salazar's motion to strike the, to override the veto of the stricken language, indicate with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? No. Okay, I'm gonna need a show of hands here. All those in favor of the motion to override the veto, please raise your hands. And all those opposed, raise your hands. Okay, the motion is denied. Any further motions? Okay, Mr. Richards, please continue.
The next section is section 341, appears on page 100 and 101 of the budget bill relating to the ARPA funds. These funds have been entirely committed by the December 31st deadline, so this is really a moot issue.
Okay, we'll go ahead and skip that.
Mr. Chairman, the final issue appears on page 102, section 342 of the budget, the Wyoming Spanish-American War Monument. This language appropriates $75,000, and by the way, it's page 99 of the governor's message, provides $75,000, and the governor has struck the specificity requiring the funds to be spent only on this, and that the funds be included in the standard budget of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources going forward.
Okay. Any questions? Any discussion? I believe we've overridden vetoes very similar to this, so is there any motions?
Yes, so moved to override.
All right, moved by Vice Chair Pendergraft, seconded by Representative Allemand. All those in favor of Vice Chair Pendergraft's motion to override this veto indicate with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, motion carries. Go ahead, Representative Pendergraft.
I don't know whether this would be a motion to reconsider. I would like to, if possible, go back to section 330. I'm just not comfortable.
Could you share the page number, please?
Yeah, as soon as I can find it. I'm not comfortable that I understood it enough to move one way or the other, and I guess I'm asking for a little bit more explanation. Section 330, 330.
These are the full-time positions, page 97 on your budget bill.
Yes.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to reopen this section for discussion and potential motions. Do I have a motion?
Yes, so moved.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, all those in favor of reopening 330 for conversation and potential motions indicate with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? Okay, we'll go ahead and reopen 330. Go ahead with your question, Representative Pendergraft.
If you could, for the sake of me just being maybe a little dense on this particular one, explain basically top to bottom. Just walk through it for me.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, first of all, I will start with the governor's position. He believes that this is an encroachment of the governor's authority and a separation of powers issue. What the legislature adopted last year is a directive to the executive branch to cut 24 full-time positions that, if eliminated, or unfilled would generate $2.1 million. So there was a directive to A, save money, and B, reduce total count of individuals. We used a ratio of one full-time position to roughly $88,000. That is inclusive of salary as well as all benefits, retirement, health insurance, and compensation. Once those positions were identified, the governor was mandated to report to this committee, and should you wish to reinstate that, the report would be appropriately delayed to the following year.
Yeah, okay, let's take a moment. Time out.
Yeah, sounds
We're on a
good.
timeout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is the position of the HAC at this point and at this time not to override this veto. Our intent would be to resume the responsibility that I spoke of earlier and perhaps target specific jobs that are long time unfilled and see what can be recovered from that. I think this kind of echoes another example of where we just said, well, we want you to cut some positions, but you go figure it out. And if it's our job to authorize the positions, it's also our job to pull them back. And we intend to do our job.
Mr. Chair, when the governor spoke to us at his state of the state, didn't he say that he'd eliminated 300 jobs? And if so, I just want to clarify, did that happen or not happen? Or could somebody tell me what that reference was? I know I heard it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hibbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, on the heels of a pandemic and a crash in state revenue, we cut a substantial number of positions and $500 million. That happened. This conversation, Representative Pendergraft, I appreciate what you just said, because this is premature, because what we're doing is the pandemic created a situation where we had uncontrolled vacancies. We had $60 million of reversions on vacancy savings. That was suffered across the expanse of the United States. This continued effort to review these long-term vacant positions, I think that's not troublesome. But it's premature to think about what this impact is because right now with the legislature's assistance on compensation, we've turned this around to where we have now more filled positions. We're doing better with the overall enterprise. And I can speak personally to how that impacts the department. What happens is that you have people that are still employed doing more and more and more. And then you create a situation where you find yourself in a burnout. And then you have an unrecoverable situation. That's just a personal observation that I have from my own department's work. That's where we were in the pandemic. We're thankful to be out of that. We're thankful to be fully staffed now at the State Budget Department. And that's very welcome for us. But I just want to let you know that this particular item, I think, was premature and it was on the heels of the pandemic. That was out of our control.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Follow up,
Senator Smith? This cut is across the board. It's not just in one particular area, one particular department, correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and I believe that the number of vacancies that we were observing here in the recent past were representative of the impact of a pandemic.
Okay.
It's premature because now we're just getting out of that. We're actually making positive ground on employment of the state of Wyoming, and that situation that I described where other people were having to pick up the slack. This is true in private enterprise. It's just not the state of Wyoming that experiences all those employees that stuck it out with us. They had to pick up the slack. But now we're in a position where we're actually making ground on that to get those positions filled. And I think that you'll see a much smaller trend for the number of vacant positions and the length of time that they're vacant. You'll see a smaller trend on that because we're making progress with all of that.
I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I think just to clarify, where we're at on this veto override, there will be opportunity if this body feels it's important to reduce the size or number of positions of government, but we would prefer on the House side it be more specific and determined by us. An example would be, if the governor chose to reduce vacancies in Department of Corrections and this body disagreed with that, by giving this latitude to the governor, we have no control over that. So I think that's our position here, and hopefully we can work together as we go through the budget next week and really zero in on those positions if we all agree that that's what we want to do. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Hibbard, for your insight. Very well taken. And I think that's part of my hesitation the first time we went through this particular section. This is something that's going to take some time and some deliberation, some consideration, more than we have available to us right here. So actually, what I'm suggesting, any cuts that we make are not going to be made without talking to the agencies and trying to get to the bottom of what you're talking about. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
All right, any motions on this section? Seeing none, we'll close this section. We have Mr. McComey here from Construction Department to give us some information on the demolition of the state hospital, so we can close that section out as well. Mr. McComey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Del McComey, Director for the State Construction Department. Currently, we have not done any demolition on the Evanston Hospital. We did let a contract early on, a larger contract. We went out on the street to start that process. During that time frame, the Health Department was having negotiations with the city, and the city was looking to take that site and perhaps repurpose it into a business type of park. And so we reduced then the number of buildings that we were originally going to try and take offline, and we didn't get any bids for that. Subsequently, those negotiations with the community continued, and currently, it's my understanding with the Director for Health that they're in negotiations, or at least there's a discussion going on with a company that does demolition and asbestos work, their training, like a CTE program. They're contemplating trying to do something there and start a program to demo buildings, do asbestos removal. And that may interpret then that the state wouldn't have to move forward and demo those buildings. They would do that through their training courses. So we're on a hold as far as moving forward with doing the demo. Should that fall come to an end, then we would probably move forward. This is really a high-level discussion I'm giving you right now. The more details, I think the director can certainly weigh in on that, because he's been handling all of those discussions. We talk from time to time just to see what the status of all that is. So if necessary, we can go back out and start the demolition.
Thank you. Director Hibbard.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The correspondence that I just received from the Director of the Department of Health concurs with the testimony that Director McComey just provided. There is a possibility that we could have a trade school that would actually be in the process of training how to do asbestos abatement, and that would be removing this on where we wouldn't have to pay for it. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a recommendation on this
Mr. Chairman,
language? Go ahead.
yes, the recommendation would be allow the current governor's veto to stand and allow us to go through the process of trying to find a use for those facilities and save the state of Wyoming some money. That's the intent.
All right. Any discussion on this section? Any motions? All right, with that, we'll close that out, and I think we're done with veto overrides. And based on the time, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Did you have something to add, Director Hibbard?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just really quick, good news in the tail end of this, Section 341 inside of here, the Wheeland Water Tower, we did fund that with ARPA direct funding, so that did get facilitated. Just want to let you know that.
Thank you. Mr. Richards.
Mr. Chairman, one last order of business, just to assist our secretaries. If you might contemplate when you would consider meeting on Monday so that we can post that either 8 a.m. or 7 or noon or upon adjournment.
I'd like to do 8 so that if we feel like we need more, we can get more meetings, get it done quickly. 8 a.m. for our next meeting.
Okay.
Meet again.
And you could carry that over to noon or adjournment, or that will be your only time?
I would prefer to do that, co-chair. Okay, we'll announce both
Okay.
morning and noon, and if we get far enough along, maybe we'll change to a JAC if we need to.
Thank you very much, sir.
We are adjourned.